All right, today we are going to make what I like to call a side shadow box slimline card. And this is one that I kind of had in my head of putting together and played around with a couple of different measurements to make sure that it would actually work. And I want to show you the inspiration for this card. This is a card that we made a little while ago, probably a good year or so ago at one of our stamp club meetings. And it is an A2 size shadow box. And it's pretty easy to make. It's out of one sheet of paper. I will definitely post some directions on how to do that. But this was the beginning point of figuring out how to make a slimline shadow box card. And this is what I came up with. It's kind of fun. A nice little shadow box on the left, a panel on the right, and it will stand up on its own. And it's just a nice little showpiece. And we are going to make this card. I have also made another card with the exact same measurements, the exact same process. And the reason I made two is I'm participating in a blog hop tonight. And the theme of that blog hop was to use the same products. And these are all from the Poinsettia Place Suite, except the stamp. Ignore that for the moment. And to come up with a project that celebrates two occasions. Obviously, I chose Christmas and birthday and put these two together. I am going to make another of the Christmas cards as I go through and I show you how to do this. It is pretty straightforward. It is very addictive, and it is really not my fault if you find that you want to make quite a few of these, because I think they're fun and very impactful. There are not a lot of pieces that are involved. You can ignore the pieces that I've die cut because there are quite a few of those. But in terms of paper, there's not a lot of paper that you need to make the card. In fact, you start with your choice of a card base, your choice of color. I started this card base with one piece of 8.5 by 11 cardstock. So this is what my base actually looked like. I've cut it into 3 pieces. And you can see when I orient the paper into the cutting board, I put the paper in so the 11 inches is horizontal. I cut it at 4 inches, turned it around, cut it at 4 inches, and that gave me 3 pieces of paper. These are the 3. I have 2 that are 4 inches wide by 8.5 inches long, and I have 1 piece that is 3 inches wide by 8.5 inches long. This 3 by 8.5 is extra. So you can put that to the side because you are not going to be using that to make the card. The card base is made from 2 pieces of cardstock. I do recommend that you use the same color for these 2 pieces. They are both 8.5 inches long. They are both 4 inches wide. They are both scored at the exact same place. And let's just talk about those score lines and why they're scored the way they're scored. So here we have it. We've got a piece that is 8.5 inches long, 4 inches high. We're going to score that at a 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 5 inches, and 4.5 inches. I'm sorry, 5.5 inches. And you can see if I put the final card up against that, what we're doing. The score lines create the area where the shadow box is going to be able to stand. It's kind of like the width of the shadow box. The second score line here at 1 inch And the third score line at 5 inches gives you 4 inches to use for your shadow box. It's a really nice size right here. That's 4 inches wide. So you can put a nice frame. Then on the other side, after your 5.5 inch score, you have 3 inches because this is 8.5 inches long. So you have 3 inches that you can use, and that is going to be the size of your panel. And you'll see that as we're building this, we're going to add some color, and this is where at least I put my sentiment. To add to the frame on the front, we're going to use a couple more layers of paper. I've chosen some colors that I think work together well. One is Early Espresso, and the other comes from the Poinsettia Place Designer Series paper. And if I just put these down and I bring back the final card, you're going to see that they work together to build the frame around the opening. And the Designer Series paper is also in the background. It's the background of the shadow box. The way that I decided to create that Designer Series paper piece in the back, as well as the opening in the front, is I am going to take the Designer Series paper. I'm going to add a little bit of glue around the piece. And let me tell you the measurements on this before I do that. The measurements on the Early Espresso piece is 3 7/8 inch square. So this is 3 7/8 inch wide, 3 7/8 inch tall. The Designer Series paper is 3 3/4 by 3 3/4. The reason for that is if I have a 4-inch square that I can use for the shadow box, I wanted a piece of cardstock that was going to be big enough for the frame, but also leave a little bit of that, in this case, the real red cardstock as a border. So I cut this piece of cardstock 1/8 inch less on the width and the height as my area for the shadow box. And remember, this is 4 by 4 on the real red piece. So if I take 1/8 of an inch off, I'm going to have 3 7/8 and 3 7/8. Same thing with the Designer Series paper. I want to have a little bit of a border of that Early Espresso around the edge. That means I'm going to cut the Designer Series paper 1/8 of an inch shorter and less wide than the Early Espresso. So it's going to be 3 3/4, 3 3/4. I'm going to glue my Designer Series paper to my Early Espresso cardstock. And when I do that, I am going to make sure that I'm putting the adhesive only around the edge. The reason is I'm going to be die cutting out the middle, and that is going to be the background in the shadow box. So I don't want to put glue where I am going to take out the piece that I have die cut and use that as the background for the shadow box. So I've just put that together. Again, I just put adhesive on the outside. Now I'm going to place that 2-piece that I just adhered together, my cardstock and Designer Series paper. I'm going to place that onto the area where that shadow box is going to be. So this is what I'm aiming for. I'm getting ready to die cut the square. And to do that, I am going to put my piece in the middle, and I'm using the 5-inch score line and the 1-inch score line. I'm trying to get this piece in between those two. and then also the top and the bottom of the real red. So just trying to get that as centered as I can. And then I'm going to use some washi tape. And I'm just going to fix those pieces onto the card base. I've taken the washi tape off the roll that I had of washi, and I have attached that to my hand and pulled it up a couple of times just to try to get some of the adhesive off. Washi tape isn't as strong as regular tape, and you definitely want to take off some of the tackiness off that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my die, and I've chosen to use a square die. This is about 3¼ inch square. You can use any shape that you want. You'll see on the card that was the inspiration, I used a circle. You could use a rectangle, an oval. You could use a label. There's some really pretty dies, like in the Tasteful dies that we have that have some really nice shapes that would work well. When you're thinking about the shape that you're going to use, think about how much area you need to see in the opening. You can see this circle a lot smaller than the square that I used on this card, because the poinsettia is going to be a lot bigger than the little squirrel was that I put here. So once you've chosen the shape that you're going to use for your die, you want to put your die as best as you can. Don't say anything mean to yourself, but try to get it as centered as you can on now the designer series paper. And we're going to put some more washi onto the die to hold that in place. And then we're going to run this through our die cutting machine. Now remember, when you're doing this, you've added more layers than you probably typically do when you're die cutting. Your machine may not be the absolute happiest when you're doing this. Be patient, sing a happy song, hum along, whatever you need to do. And what I have found is if I put the piece through my machine, and I'm going to angle it just a tad. I don't want that front edge of my square to go in square or straight. I want to angle it just a little bit. That will help the die go through, and it will help it cut a little bit easier. I'm going to go ahead and run that through. I know watching somebody die cut is like watching paint dry, so I apologize. I'm going to run it back. And because I really want to make sure this is cutting well, I'm going to do that one more time. And because I have all of this taped together, I should be able to flip the combined pieces over and see how I'm doing with the cut. And I've got a little bit more that I need to do. That's not quite cut all the way through. So I'm going to flip this over, and now the blades are up. And I find that on the second time when I'm running this through, this is the longest part of getting this card together. If I put the blades so that they are facing up, and I'm going to do 2 passes again on this. So I'm running it through and running it back. I'm going to do it one more time. Run it through and back. I find that the second time that I'm doing this and I'm putting the blades facing up, it really helps. And you can see that by doing that, I've got the cut that I need. So I can see it's It's a little hard on camera, but I can see as I kind of pull it up that I was able to cut all the way through. And I have that done. So now, let me get this out of the way. Now we're at the point where we can start to think about how we're going to put all of this together. But obviously, the first thing we need to do is to get all the pieces that we have put down to die cut. We need to get those apart. As you are taking your washi tape off, you're going to notice that it is pretty stuck. And the reason is we had a lot of thickness that we were running through the machine. When you pull your washi tape off, the thing you want to do, my nails are shot, but you want to get a little corner and then pull it as straight against the paper as you can and go slowly. If you find that when you're doing that, you're tearing your paper, put the washi tape back on and pull it from the other side. I've got my die taken out and I have 3 squares that are going to come out of what I just did. I'm going to put those to the side for just a minute. And now I'm just going to work on getting the washi tape off of the rest of this. So I'm taking the washi tape off and really taking my time, not rushing this, pulling as straight across as I can. And off it will come. Now, one thing you may find, and I did on this particular die, is that because we had so much thickness, when we die cut the shape, that there might be a little indentation. I'll show you that in just a second. I just want to get this pulled off. Go from this side. This is the longest part of this process. And once you've got this done, you are golden, because the rest of it is literally putting the card together. So I am, again, taking my time. Another thing that you may want to consider is using a Post-it note. A Post-it note will work. It's not quite as strong as the washi tape, so it can move just a tad. But what I was going to mention is my die actually put a little border. You can kind of see that where the die itself made a little bit of an indentation. I'm fine with that. That's personal preference. If you don't like it, then you may want to use a different die. Let's talk about what you have now that you've done that. You have your card base with the hole cut out. You have the frame, which we're going to attach in just a minute. That's going to go around that opening. And you have 3 squares that came out of your die. The early espresso and the real red squares are extras. You don't need these necessarily for the card, so you can put those aside. You may want to use them later for decorating. That will be up to you. The 2 pieces that are key right now are the designer series paper square that you cut, and also the frame, the piece that has the, in my case, the early espresso and the designer series paper. We're going to put them to the side for a moment, but the first thing you really should do is make sure you know how to put your designer series paper square back into the hole. It's like a puzzle. Look at the way the design is and make sure you know what is right side up. And just put those to the side together, because we're going to get to them in just a minute. Now what I want to do is show you how to fold the card base to make the card. And then we're just going to start attaching everything together. You're going to think I'm nuts, but I have this shaving brush And some people ask me, why do I have a shaving brush in my craft room? Well, I find that it is abrasive enough that when you get those little pieces of paper that kind of stick when you're doing die cuts, this is great to just get it off. And that's what I use it for. These two pieces are going to make my card base, and I'm going to fold them, and I'll show you how to fold them. They're all accordion folds. So let me just fold them, and then you can mimic these. And this is how you want to fold the front piece. I'm holding it so the left side is on my left, and you want the 1-inch score line and the 5-inch score line to be folded away from you, because they're going to make the shadow box that's going to pop forward. So the 1-inch folds toward you, I'm sorry, away from you, and the 5-inch folds away from you. The 1/2 inch comes toward you, the 5.5 inch comes toward you. So it's going to look like that. You're going to do the opposite on the piece in the back. But the easiest way to do it is to honestly just do the same thing, and then we're going to turn it around. I'll show you what I mean. So I am folding these exactly the way I folded the front piece, because again, the back of the shadow box is going to pop out. So that 1-inch score line is going to be folded away from you. The 5-inch is folded away from you. The other two come toward you. You do want to get a nice burnish on all the score lines. So take just a minute, use your bone folder, and do a nice burnishing on those. And I'm going to sit these up in just a second, and you'll be able to see how they come together and how they will frame the box and the panel. So this is my back piece. It's going to be like that. And I'm just going to do some burnishing on my front piece so that it has some really nice creases and it will stand up on its own. So just running through these. All right. So here's my front piece. Here's my back piece. Eventually, we are going to connect them like this. So you're going to have the two short ends on the same side and the two long ends on the same side. And eventually these are going to be put together to build your card base. Before we do that, the next step is to put the back aside for just a second, to focus on the front and to get your frame. And what we're going to do is we are going to attach the outer part of the frame to the front of the card. The reason that I took the back part away is I don't want to get any glue on the back part of the card. I'm going to adhere this piece onto the front, and I want to make sure that I don't have anything underneath this that I could accidentally get some glue on. This is where I'm also going to pause for just a minute, and I'm going to make sure that I know the orientation of how I want that frame on the card. And I want it this way. I want my design to be like this. So I am purposely going to flip this over, and I'm going to get some liquid glue, and I'm going to glue this frame around the hole. And you don't have to put a ton of glue on this. I just recommend a nice liberal line kind of down the middle of each of the sides. And then I am going to align this piece, this frame, and I'm going to put it so that it is right next to the hole that I have cut. And I know that this is going to fit because I purposely made everything line up. A great way to check it is to turn it over, and you should not see any of the designer series paper or the early espresso on the edges if you've lined it up. It's going to align perfectly because we die cut everything at the same time. So now I have that front piece adhered. The next step that we want to do after we have the front piece on is we want to put the back piece on. What I have found works the best is that we really need to assemble the card base first before putting that back piece on, because you really want everything stabilized. You want to know how the card is going to get oriented so that you have the right place to put that back piece, and it looks like it is right in the middle of that shadow box. So the way to do that is we're going to do this in 2 steps. I'm going to bring back the back of the card. The first step is we're going to glue the small ends together. So where I want to go with the first step is I want to glue these 2 sides together. So I'm going to end up with these 2 pieces adhered. And the way I'm going to do that, super simple. I'm just going to take some glue, put it right on that little edge. I'm going to take my front piece, and my edge is the same side because I've cut the piece to the same dimension. I've scored at 1/2 inch, and I am just trying to make sure that I can align these 2 pieces as best as I can. Again, not saying bad things. And now they are adhered together. So we're starting to build that shadow box. And I have the 2 smaller pieces adhered together. The other side of the card isn't yet put together, the panel. Where I'm going with this, what I'm trying to get to is the point where I can put my designer series piece, that square, in the back of the shadow box and make sure that it aligns with the opening on the front. Well, again, I found if you put the entire card together first, you've got a much better chance of doing that. So the next step that we're going to do is we're actually going to glue the panel together. And what that means is we're going to glue these 2 pieces here together. I'm going to open this up now. It's like it's a big horizontal card. And this is the back piece. This is the panel side of the back piece. And I am literally going to put glue on here. And you do want to make sure you get a little bit in the middle. You don't need to do a lot. And I'm bringing in my front part of the card base. And what I'm going to do, again, is since these 2 pieces are the same size and scored at the same place, I'm just putting those 2 together. I'm going to turn everything around and try to make sure that I have my corners and my edges aligned okay. And once I've done that, I have put together the base of my card. And you can see that this is really nice. There's a lot of room over on the right, where I will be in just a few minutes adding another set of cardstock and designer series paper for my panel. But before I do that, I want to finish up the shadow box side. And that means that I need to attach this designer series paper square into the back of the shadow box. And I need to get it so it looks like it is purposely there. The way to do that, don't panic, you're going to flatten down your card. And right now I'm sort of holding this down and pushing it down. It will pop back up without a problem. I am also taking 2 seconds to make sure that I have that middle piece oriented correctly. I want the pattern to look continuous. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to pop that out. Got to make sure I know which way is up. I'm just going to flip it. And I'm going to add some glue to the back of that square piece of designer series paper. And then it's as if I am adding a puzzle piece into the middle of the shadow box. And what I mean by that, got glue on my finger here, is I am going to take this square piece that's going to go in the back. I know that I have it oriented correctly. I'm holding down the left side of the shadow box frame, and I'm going to butt that piece of square cardstock right up against that side. And if I lay it down, I'm building a little puzzle. I am just fitting that square piece into the hole. And then when I lift it up, I know that it's centered. And I know that the design looks like it is carrying across and also up and down. Now I'm going to concentrate on the side panel. And just like the measurements that we used for the frame and the shadow box, I've purposely cut my paper for the side panel so I will have a similar area outside, in this case, the early espresso, and outside my designer series paper, so I have a nice border of color. The panel is cut to, for the early espresso, it is 2 7/8 inches wide, 3 7/8 inches high. It's the same height as what we have for the panel over here. Remember, this is 3 inches wide, and I want to take off 1/8 of an inch. So I've cut that to 2 7/8. My designer series paper is 2 3/4 by 3 3/4. Again, it's going to be the same size in height as the designer series paper on the frame. And this is simply putting things together. So I am just going to add some glue to my designer series paper and put that onto the early espresso. And then I'm going to add some glue to the early espresso and put that directly onto the panel. And if you have a design on your designer series paper, just make sure that when you're putting it onto the panel, that you're getting the pattern oriented the way that you want. And again, we're going to have the same amount of, in this case, real red cardstock showing around the panel as we do around the frame. So I am just putting this right on the side, and again, trying to center it as best as I can on that panel. So now I have my base, I have my card, and the rest is really decoration. And it is completely up to you what you would like to do. What I chose to do on this card, this is obviously the final card that I had made, is I used some of the dies from the Poinsettia dies collection. I chose vanilla white, I'm sorry, berry vanilla white, that doesn't even make sense, berry vanilla, as the color that I wanted to use for my poinsettia. I thought it really pulled out some of the color in the designer series paper. I cut out 1 of the medium poinsettia pieces and 2 of the small. And then I also used the poinsettia dies and I cut out some leaves using the brushed metallic cardstock. and 2 from the small leaf and 1 from the larger leaf. For the center of the poinsettia, I used the brushed metallic cardstock, and I just cut out the center, as you can see. And then I use the die that has these really fun little sprigs. And again, I use some of the brushed metallic cardstock, cut out different colors from the brushed metallic, and I put everything together and just made the design that I wanted for that poinsettia. Tucked in some of the sprigs here and there. Use my bone folder to give a little bit of depth to the petals to make them look a little bit more three-dimensional. And on the panel, I added a piece that was stamped on garden green using early espresso. This is a stamp from the Poinsettia Petals stamp set. And I really liked the size. I thought the size on this one, cut with one of the circle dies from the Stitched Shapes dies, was enough. And when I put that piece onto the panel, since the panel had some design already, I didn't really think I needed to add anything to it. So that's how I decorated that card. For my happy birthday card, the only difference that I have on this one is that I still use the poinsettia dies. I still cut out the same kind of leaf pieces. And then on the panel itself, because I used a smaller stamp, and this comes from the Postage for You stamp set, I thought it needed a little bit more. And also the designer series paper on the birthday card versus the designer series paper on the holiday card, not quite as much going on. So I wanted to double up on the die pieces and also add a little bit more of the sprigs and pull in some white on that as well. But essentially you can, the sky is the limit in terms of how you will end up decorating these cards. This is almost a blank canvas that you now have once you've got your die or your card base together. You can do anything with this. And know that you can put these into an A2 and A10 envelope, which is a business size or a resume size envelope, and they can be mailed without a problem. So I hope you enjoy these. I think they are very fun. They're really not difficult to put together. You can definitely get on a production line and make them, and they are great for any occasion. So enjoy and have fun making the slimline side shadow box cards.